Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, How to Hunt with Zeek Using Sigma Rules for Your SIEM, sponsored by Corelight. My name is Carol Auth of SANS, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Vince Stoffer, Senior Director of Product Management, Mark Overholzer, Sales Engineer, and Alex Kirk, Global Principal Engineer, Suricata. All are at Corelight. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to our presenters.
All right, thank you, Carol. I am Alex Kirk. I'm going to be getting us started here today with a brief discussion of what is Zeek for those who might not be familiar with the technology. So to speak to it a little bit and frame it in a way that makes the most operational sense, we want to start by painting a picture of the way that most people are doing SIEM today. Typically, you're pulling sources from a variety of different devices all the way across your network, from application sorts of servers to security devices, and of course endpoints as well. And the issue with pulling all this into a SIEM and attempting to make a coherent whole out of it is that all of these different sources of data are coming from different vendors and different formats with no concept of normalization between any of them. And in the meantime are prone to all sorts of administrative issues with actually acquiring the data in the first place because of the fact that you can easily have an administrator come behind you and turn off logging to save CPU. You might have an endpoint that gets compromised and the piece of malware actually shuts off the logs at that point. And so it's a humongous amount of work that's necessary to actually collect all of this data and then normalize it into some sort of a picture that actually makes sense, where you can pivot from one piece of it to the next and actually advance your way through an investigation quickly. And that, of course, even assumes that the data that you need is in there at all. A lot of this information that is in modern SIEMs is application-centric because it's designed to make sure that your firewall is blocking ports appropriately or that your mail is delivered, and not get you information like the answers to a DNS query, for example, which are very important for a threat hunter following up on a suspicious query, but not so much for a DNS server administrator figuring out whether or not they're responding to queries still. And so Zeek is the counterpoint to that. It is a single open source standard that is designed to log everything that occurs on your network, all the way from your basic layer 4 sort of flow information up through all of the different layer 7 protocols that are on modern networks, as well as the files that ride on top of those layer 7 protocols, and do so in a standardized, forensic-centric sort of a format that not only contains all of the detail that's necessary to investigate security incidents very closely, but is also done with unified timestamps and a unique identifier that we lay down on a per connection basis that ties all these different logs together, so that it's very easy to do a single pivot and get all of the data that's necessary to understand what's going on around an alert, an incident, you name it, the data is there. And the way that this is typically deployed is also going to simplify the process of pulling all that information into a useful central spot, because instead of needing to touch all of the various endpoints that you might collect information from, we're passively tapping the network, whether that be on the physical side or the cloud and virtual side, and transforming that layer 7 network data into the metadata logs that I showed you previously, as well as alerts, both from Zeek itself at the network analytics layer, as well as Suricata is now available on our platform as well. So you've got signature-driven alerting. And take all of that data and be able to send it into one or more analytics systems of your choice, so that you can feed all of the user behavior, the AI, the ML, all of the detection technologies that may be present in your environment with a single consistent set of information that really lines up well with all the models from all of these analytics tools, because again, it's an open source technology that's been around for 25 years and is the gold standard of network logging and data. And so this really is designed to give you all of the information that is necessary at the at a moment's notice, and be able to easily pivot through it and get to the information you need rapidly, as opposed to spending all of your time trying to link things that were never designed to be linked together. So to take this and sort of bring it to the next level, of course, we are partnering with a number of different organizations to make sure that people know how to actually make use of this data. And one of the things that we've done from an open source perspective is published a free guide for security operations analysts to be able to go and do some of the threat hunting that everyone in management talks about wanting them to do. This document is organized around the MITRE framework and gives you detailed information about how to actually look for different indicators within that data, both from a very specific perspective, in that there's a number of Sigma rules that we're going to talk about a little further into this presentation that are designed to make use of that data in a highly operational way, but also in a more generic sort of knowledge transfer process, so that we're trying to train analysts to understand what they need to look for at a high level, so that they can dive into any incident, no matter what its shape or size, and be able to make the best use of the data that we have. So that's something that is available for free with this QR code or on our website today, and we would encourage you to go download as a companion to the Sigma rules that we're talking about further on in this presentation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Vince to dive into Sigma and those rules.
Thanks, Alex, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm going to talk briefly about what is Sigma. Alex gave an intro to Zeek, and want to dive in a little bit before we describe what the rules are, to describe what Sigma is itself. If you haven't heard of it, Sigma is an open source project which provides a generic signature format for SIEMs. And one of their taglines is, it's like log files, two log files, what snort is for network traffic and yar is for files. I think I kind of like the description better of thinking of it like a Rosetta Stone of SIEM queries, right? So what Sigma does is allow you to have a single language, a format that you can write rules in, and then using various converters, you can apply those rules that you've written and translate them into queries for the domain-specific language or query language for your SIEM. So that's pretty powerful in a number of ways, and let's talk a little bit more about what it looks like. But first, how do you connect something like Zeek and its data model to Sigma? Well, that has to obviously be mapped, and that's an important part of Sigma itself, is making sure that all the data mappings for the products or projects you're working on are there. So Sigma had been pretty heavily endpoint based early on, mostly geared around kind of EDR logs and other things that might be going into SIEMs traditionally, and some, I guess, just wasn't as focused on network data. We contracted with SOC Prime, and big shout out to Nate Guagenti, who did this work last year, and he created the Zeek data mappings for Sigma. So we published those last year. There's a link to a quick demo here and to the actual Sigma branch where you can see the Zeek data, but essentially this allows us to take Zeek's very comprehensive and open source data format and get that into the Sigma language. So now you can use Zeek specific data types and fields to be able to reference when using the Sigma language, which is the first step, and that's great. The next step is then to put together some queries. And so here's an example of a query. This is one that was written around Zeek, and in this case, it's showing a specific PS exec execution, but using a Zeek event. And so what you see on the right is kind of an example of what the schema for Sigma looks like, and it's pretty standardized, and you can go and read about this on Sigma's website. And then on the left, you see an actual example of this rule. So you see the description and kind of the authors, when it was written, some references, tags, and then the detection piece itself under there is actually what is being searched for. So you see how it has a certain selection, it's looking for some paths, and then it has a condition there. And so an example of how simple Sigma is and kind of really easy to write out in straightforward language. And then on the next slide, we'll see what that actually looks like when you translate it from Sigma's format into a query for a specific SIEM. So we have two examples here, Elastic and Splunk, and you can see that they're quite similar, right? They're both looking for those same paths. They're looking for IPC dollar and that administrative share, right? But they're slightly different because they're using those query languages specific to those SIEMs. So it's a little bit it's easy to think of how you could translate those into, just a single SIEM. But when you start getting up to, many rules or start wanting to translate, a whole bunch of more complicated queries than this one might be, it could be a little daunting, right? So having something like Sigma is pretty fantastic for a number of reasons. So there's a number of tools that help. The threat detection marketplace from SOC Prime is one of the go-to places for Sigma rules at this point, and the website is listed there. They've got a whole set of free content. They also have like paid rules, and they have a pretty cool bounty program where people can actually write rules for specific SIEMs or for Sigma and get paid for them, which is cool. There's also a couple other tools. There's, Sigma has a command line tool which can translate queries into other SIEM query languages and do various translations. There is a site called Uncoder, which is also something from SOC Prime, which is kind of like a translator app where you can do most of that on a web page. And both TDM and Uncoder from SOC Prime have a bunch of different SIEM and data formats, and those are all mapped in there as well. So that's pretty great to be able to take a single rule in Sigma and then translate it up to 15 or more SIEMs potentially. So with that, I wanted to mention what we have just released. So as Alex said, we have this threat hunting guide, which we've worked on, and the version that we have just released is actually our V2. And as Alex noted, it's centered around the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And we just released 70 new Sigma rules, authored by SOC Prime. So again, we contracted with SOC Prime to write these rules, and we worked together with them very closely to make sure they aligned with our threat hunting guide. And so those are mapped across a whole bunch of different MITRE ATT&CK TTPs in 10 categories, and they're free and open to contributions and improvements. So we first wanted to host these on the threat detection marketplace so they could get as much exposure as possible, and so they are available there, and we'll show you how to get access to them there. We also have them accessible just directly from Corelight. We can send you the rules bundle as just a zip file if you want. We're working to try to expose these also in some sort of format, maybe like GitHub or something in the future, so that people could more easily make contributions and suggest changes and modifications. For right now, you can do all of that through TDM. So I'm going to hand it over to Mark to talk a little bit more about how you get these rules and what you do with them once you log into TDM.
Thanks, Vince. So how do you get the rules? You have a couple of different options. Option number one, of course, visit the SOC Prime Threat Detection Marketplace here at tdm.socprime.com. If you already have an account, you can just log in. If you don't have an account, they are free to create, so don't get hung up on anything like that. It's a free account, and access to all of the rules that we're providing is free. Once you're in there, you want to search for Corelight up in the search bar. There are a couple of tags that are applied to these rules so that you can find them easily. They're shown here. One is Corelight THG, the other is Corelight Threat Hunting Guide. So after you type Corelight in the search bar, if you don't hit enter, a little drop-down box will come up with suggestions. Just pick one of those tags from the suggestion panel, and it will finish that search for you and show you the rules. So what that would look like is something like this. So we have I'm showing 4 of the rules here: RDP suspicious keyboard layout, client transferring a large amount of data over HTTP, multiple compressed files transferred over HTTP. The title should give you a general feel for what the rule or the query is about. And then if you click on one, it will drill into a view that looks something like this. So on the left-hand side will be all the different technology types that you're working with. For our rules, you're going to want to select Corelight from that list. Now, if you don't see Corelight in the sort of top 10 options there, click that Show More button in the bottom left. It will expand the list so that you can see all the options and you can find Corelight from among those options and select it. Everybody's view is going to be a little bit different because when you sign up for an account, the threat detection marketplace will ask you what are the technologies you use, and those are the ones that it's going to show at the top of this list when you're in the threat detection marketplace. So if you didn't select Corelight when you created your account and you haven't gone back to tell it that you use Corelight, then it's not going to be up top in the list. So click on Show More, go find Corelight, click on that. Once you have selected Corelight, then the bar along the top there, where I have Splunk query highlighted, that's going to be where you select the specific SIEM that you want to export to. So we have here Elastic Query, Elastic Alert Rule, Elastic Watcher. Splunk Query is the one that I have selected. There are a handful more. If you click on that button that says More with the little down caret off to the right, that will show you other options, including things like Azure Sentinel, right? That's another common one that we see. So I've selected Splunk Query here. And so it is actually showing us already the translated version of this. If you wanted to see the original Sigma, you could just click on Sigma in that left-hand panel. It's 4 down from Corelight, and you could get to the original Sigma. But it's really nice to be able to find the rule, click on it, and have it already translated for you. You don't have to do anything. The last thing to do is just to click that Copy to Clipboard button. It's the 2 overlapping rectangles. I have that highlighted there in red as well off to the right. And that will drop it on your clipboard. Then you can go to your SIEM, paste it in, and execute the query to get going. So the other option for downloading the rules is to download the entire pack in Sigma format. They're just flat text files containing the Sigma. They do require you to translate them to your SIEM, okay? So if you download this rule pack, you will then need to go to uncoder.io to paste in the Sigma query and select the SIEM for translation. You can do that. Or if you want to, you can go get the Sigma utilities from the Sigma GitHub repo. I believe there's a utility called Sigmac, Sigma C, S-I-G-M-A-C. And you can configure that to translate things environmentally based on your SIEM and the configuration and all of that. It's a little bit more time consuming. So I think that there is definitely an advantage in just going to the threat detection marketplace to find the rules. But if you want to get the Sigma rules all in one big bundle, here it is. And that QR code is a link as well to download those. Let's take a look at a few different rules just so you get a sense for what they can do. This one here, possible web shell put or post to unusual extensions. This is, of course, really extremely relevant, even more relevant now than it was when I put the slide in here, because of the wave of Exchange exploits that have come out recently. This is exactly the sort of technique that some threat actors use when they are dropping a web shell or exercising a web shell. Is a sign of this will be puts or posts to file extensions that you wouldn't normally expect there to be a put or post to, like a cascading style sheet or a JPEG or a PNG file or a GIF or GIF, depending on how you pronounce it. So that query already has all of that logic built into it. So you don't have to go and build it out. Get it, translate it, paste it into your SIEM. And here's an example. I dropped this into a sample data set that I had, and there's a bunch of posts to this spillpaletonline.com host at pixel.gif. That's really strange. And it's a bunch of them from the same origin. So something fishy is definitely going on there. I want to investigate that. It's sort of a slam dunk there. Now, this next one is not one that you can immediately take all of the output from and say, like, this is all bad, right? The previous one looked really fishy. Probably 99% or better of what you're going to see from that previous query is stuff you can immediately action and say, I want to block that host. I think something's compromised, whatever it is. This one is response from external facing service. So this is the type of query that you would use to discover what properties do you have inside your network that are responding to requests from the outside world. And this is, of course, something you'd use as a counterpoint to your asset inventory. So your asset inventory probably already has some sort of tag or attribute where you say it has a web-facing something, right? It has a port that's listed online and accepting queries or something like that. But this is another way for you to get this. The network doesn't lie. If the packets are there and they're coming from the outside world and they're receiving a response, then that thing is exposed to the outside world. And this query will show you those. And you can go through and say, oh, okay, this one's already in my inventory. This one was already in my inventory. This one was already in my inventory. But what about this one? This one wasn't in my inventory. So what is it? And dive deeper and figure out what it is. Go find the application owner or the asset owner and ask them, hey, why wasn't this documented? Can we get this documented in our inventory? What is the purpose of having this out in the outside world? If you happen to find something that's completely unexpected, like in this case, this system is receiving requests on port 22. It's most likely SSH. I want to ask them and do the risk assessment and say, why do we have this publicly facing on port 22? Do we have the option to move it to a different port to obfuscate it just a little bit if it really truly needs to be on the internet? Am I receiving the logs, the authentication logs from the SSH service so that I can review those later, right? So there's a lot of things you can do with a query like this to help you keep on top of your environment. And here we have one, C2DGA, right? A command and control domain generation algorithm detected via repetitive failures. So this is looking at DNS queries to see what the response was and if there was a response. So it's looking for things like lots of NX domains or serve fails when there's a query. So if you have a client that's generating a lot of NX domains or a lot of serve fails, you can review those queries really quickly to get a sense for, is this a configuration issue? Did somebody misspell a domain name somewhere in a configuration? Was it a bug in an app? Or in this case, it really looks extremely suspicious. We have a system that's generating lots of long, distinct gibberish domains and trying to look them up and getting NX domains. There's probably a problem there. So Vince, do you want to talk briefly about this slide?
Yeah, I think we wanted to just highlight the fact that these rules are out there. We're very excited to have them in the Sigma format so that we can translate them into other SIEMs, and that brings about several advantages. One, it just allows us to write the rules once and to have them translated into multiple platforms. So that's great for everyone who's using those various platforms and can download them all right out of the box without us writing 5 or 10 different types of rules for each instance of the thing we want to write. But it's also great to translate between keep your detections as you keep them portable as you move between SIEMs. And you say, well, we're not going to be moving SIEMs, but what if you're just I don't know, in the middle of a transition between Splunk and something else, or you're exploring possibly doing threat hunting in a different platform? We talk to a lot of customers who are in that situation where they're either in transition between products, or they're exploring other products either for cost or performance or feature reasons. So it's great to have something like Sigma serve as that universal medium. And of course, I didn't mention, but if anything, a limitation of Sigma, and I wouldn't call it a downside, is just that it is a kind of lowest common denominator. It's meant to be the thing that can be operable between all those query languages, but of course it doesn't have the high performance enhancements that some of those query languages have for doing really specific and interesting things in their particular platforms, right? So you can definitely use Sigma to start. You can definitely use it to translate pretty great detection queries and logic into those SIEMs, but it's also something that you can take and then extend into a more efficient, highly tailored query for your particular environment in your SIEM language. So I just wanted to mention that, and this is just a picture of the MITRE ATT&CK matrix showing what these 70 queries that we just released cover. And as I mentioned, we'd really love to get feedback from people on whether these are working, how they're working, improvements, better ideas for, particular things that we have, or even ideas for, sections of the threat hunting guide that aren't being covered. So we definitely would love suggestions. And again, you can send those directly to us at Corelight, or you can go on to TDM. And if you're looking at a specific rule, I believe there's a feedback button. And so you can provide feedback there as well. So with that, I think that brings us to Q&A. We wanted to keep this pretty short, really just to give you guys an idea of what Zeek is, what Sigma is, a little bit about Corelight and our threat hunting guide, and then an overview of these great new rules we released. I think we do have time for some Q&A for sure, and I'll leave the links up here for the downloading the threat hunting guide and how to get to TDM to take a look at the rules.
All right, thanks for that great presentation. We do have some questions ready for the Q&A. However, if anyone has a question for our presenters, please enter it into the questions window now. This first one asks, translation for Rapid7 Insight IDR?
Good question. I don't know if Rapid7 is supported yet on TDM or with Sigma, so you just have to go on and check. Some of the specific Corelight rules that Mark showed, right? There's within TDM, you've got those kind of list of options on the left, and so you could check and see if QRadar is in there. It's possible it is. The only caveat is just when he selected Corelight and we had the kind of subset of SIEMs up above, those are really just using our specific index names for the particular logs in Corelight and Zeek, so that those are translated perfectly. So there's absolutely no editing needed. It's possible that if QRadar is supported, it will be translated from Sigma, but you might just need to go in and edit the names of those files. So if you've got Corelight or Zeek data in QRadar, you might need to make sure that those index names basically match up right. Other than that, if it's supported by Sigma, it's likely in TDM. I just haven't used it, so I'm not quite sure. Good question.
And if you happen to go in and you don't see that something is supported, a particular SIEM or data management platform or analytics platform that you do use, and you have a strong desire for it, I'm sure that SOC Prime wants to hear about it. So please give them your feedback about that as well.
All right, thanks. The next one asks, how do users get appraised of updates to rules already downloaded or new rules since the last time we visited the site?
Yeah, another good question. So we have the rule pack, and each individual rule is there as well. I can't remember if you can subscribe to rules, but it will have, I think, a version in the last updated time. I'm not a TDM expert, so I don't want to give you false information, but I believe there is a way to either kind of watch those rules or the pack itself and see if there's any updates. I guess I would leave it to someone else who might know more, or you can certainly ask TDM once you get in there and ask the support link or the help link and say, hey, how do I find out if this rule got updated? If you continue to search for Corelight THG, you'll definitely see if we add any new rules that get tagged there with that same tag. But in terms of updates and what's new, I don't know how that flags or how you kind of watch those in TDM, but I believe there is a way to do so.
All right, thank you. Isn't it the case that Splunk and QRadar already have such rules? Can you elaborate on what you provide that they or other offerings do not?
Yeah, another great question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, so all of the different SIEMs have some level of intelligence or detection rules within them, but it's often a question of it being within a premium bundle. For example, a lot of the Splunk content here is a part of ES, or it being, behind the time going to that update question. There's a lot of SIEMs that are going to come out with things potentially weeks after they'd be in TDM. And, of course, the flexibility of being able to do this across multiple platforms is a big part of what's being offered with Sigma as well. So, there is going to be some overlap with the SIEMs, but there's enough difference, particularly if you're at a base level of that tool, that there's going to be additional value provided here on top of what's in your SIEM already.
Yeah, and I would just add that, while we in Corelight, we have pretty good data mapping already into, for instance, Splunk's common information model and the Elastic Common Schema and some others, right? So if you have some of those pre-canned queries in those SIEMs, hopefully you'll be using that unified data model, and you'll be able to actually use those queries to query whatever properties or fields of Zeek data are in there and mapped. But there are also some things that are Corelight proprietary within these rules. So if you're a Corelight user, you'll also get some particular fields that aren't going to be mapped because they're kind of unique proprietary stuff that don't, those fields don't map into a common data model. So there's also some queries that will help there. The last part I'd say is just the biggest difference is that this is all focused, these queries are all focused around Zeek data. So they're all focused around network data coming from either open source Zeek or Corelight. And that's the real difference. So while some of the SIEMs are going to be focused on some of these techniques, they may not have quite the intricacy or, focus on the particular network data sets that we do.
All right, thank you. Could you go through the various pieces in a little more detail, SNORT, Zeek, SIEM, SOAR, XDR, and how your items related to them?
Yeah.
So
you want to tackle that one, Alex, or me, or want me to?
I'll give it a shot to start,
Okay.
I think, and you can fill in any gaps I might leave. So, Snort and Suricata from an IDS perspective are sort of point-in-time detections. You're able to see things as they cross the wire, whereas Zeek data is something that you're going to be able to keep historically for, literally UC Berkeley, where it came out of, has 25 years worth of these logs. And so that data is something that is going to be fed into your SIEM, data lake, whatever other analytics platform you might have, to be correlated with your endpoint data, with threat intelligence, with other kind of inputs in a central location. And then that feeds into your SOAR so that you can come behind and say, I've got these IDS alerts that are a category of like DNS suspicious queries that you want to have looked up. And the data that Zeek provides to go along with that alert is something that's very easy to map to out of your source so that you can figure out if it actually proceeded to something malicious and you need to now go and remediate and kick that endpoint off the network or whatever, versus it came back an NX domain and nothing really happened and there's not an action to take. From the perspective of XDR, I would just say that there's a lot of overlap between SIEM and XDR at the end of the day, because they're really both places where you're centralizing endpoint and network data and then applying analytics to them. And so that's a little bit of a blurry line, but fundamentally the relationship between Zeek data and Snort and Suricata alerts is identical between SIEM and XDR, in that those technologies are not going to work without the data that feeds all of the algorithms, and we're that gold standard for the network data in that arena.
Yeah, that's really a great answer, Alex. The only thing I'd add is that these items specifically that we're talking about, the Sigma queries, are really, again, focused on threat hunting. And so Snort and a lot of the data that Alex mentioned going into your SIEM or your XDR platform might not be focused necessarily around threat hunting, might be focused around, for instance, incident response, generating alerts and investigating those alerts. So a lot of the rules that we've talked about here are really focused around threat hunting and using that guide to say, hey, what is threat hunting? How do I start doing it in my environment? How do I go about formulating a question that I have, I need to answer, and then going into the data and finding out that answer, and then using something like maybe, SIEM alerts to follow this up in the future, so that this threat hunt that I just did that identified a particular area of risk or a number of vulnerabilities will no longer happen in the future because I'll be watching for it. Or as part of the threat hunt, I've identified some particularly, infected or problematic systems in my network, and I might use SOAR to then go on and take action against those and isolate them or remediate them.
All right, thank you. The next question asks, can we expect translations of Sigma rules to a specific SIEM be improved over time to take advantage of some of the SIEM-specific optimizations you mentioned?
Yeah, great question. I actually just had this conversation with someone the last few days. I don't know that Corelight is going to take that on right away. I think for now we're really, we're excited about kind of getting more momentum behind the Sigma movement, and so I think we'd continue to release new rules and improve them in the Sigma format, and probably leave it to individuals, our customers or other users to kind of take those into their SIEM and improve on them. And certainly if you wanted to contribute them back, I'd love to say that we can make that a part of this project. And I think that's a great goal, but I don't think we'll probably be taking on those optimizations, just so that we can have kind of a broad, holistic view of all the things that people might be using, and trying to keep those rules just as generic as possible.
Vince, if I could piggyback on that, I think, the spirit of the question is about having the Sigma translator take advantage of some of the more advanced query functionality that is SIEM specific. And in that case, that's not something that Corelight can take on. We're not in control of the Sigma translator, but SOC Prime is. And these rules that these rules that we published with them, that they authored with us and are hosting on the threat detection marketplace, they're actually supported content, right? So they want to know if there's something wrong with the rule, and they want to know if there's something that can be done to improve the rule. So I think that's valid feedback to provide to SOC Prime, to say, hey, I think I translated it with the threat detection marketplace, and the rule that came out used this particular Splunk query format. It looked like this, but I think that if it had come out looking like this other thing, right, and provide them with, I'd prefer to see it use this in the pipeline, or what have you. That would be valid feedback for them to go back to their engineering department and say, how can we do this? How can we make it figure out when to use this query logic versus that query logic, and so that they can build a stronger translator that gives you more performant translations in the future.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, thanks. The next one asks, does this work with OS Zeek?
Yeah, so the rules will work with open source Zeek. As I mentioned, there are a subset of rules, it's a pretty small subset, that have some of the Corelight proprietary data fields, so those particular ones won't work. But the majority of the rules will work with open source Zeek. Again, the only issue is just in that how you name the log index names in your SIEM. And so usually that will just be a small kind of search and replace in the rules to make sure that you're using whatever destination for those Zeek indexes in your SIEM are being mapped. So if you use the Corelight button, you're going to get what we use as the default for Corelight, and not open source Zeek. So just a slight modification, and all these rules should work great for open source Zeek as well.
All right, thanks. The next one asks, it says, you said this was free, but I see I need to log in to TDM. Does this require a paid subscription to SOC Prime TDM?
You want to take that one, Mark?
So TDM has a free registration level where you get access to a large chunk of their content, but not all of it. These are in that free tier of access because there's something that we at Corelight paid to have written, and are just using TDM as a marketplace to distribute them.
Yeah, and I will say that's also why we gave the second option, right? So if you really don't want to log into TDM and create a free account and explore the pretty cool marketplace they have, no problem. Just download or write us at info@corelight.com, and we'll send you a zip of those Sigma roles right now. And as I mentioned, we will be working pretty soon to get actual bundles, for example, Splunk and Elastic and stuff that we can have direct downloads to as well. So.
All right, thanks. This one asks, do I have to install any software to use any of this?
Of course, anyone who is using these queries will need to have some data to query against, right? So you'll need to be using Corelight or open source Zeek to generate the logs of the network traffic. So that's step one. Step two, of course, is you'll need to translate the query to use the data repository that you're using. So either if you go get the rule from the threat detection marketplace, that doesn't require installing any software. You can just go find the rule and get the translation directly. If you download the Sigma pack, you can of course use uncoder.io as a translator, so there's no installation required there. If you choose to, you can go get the Sigma command line utilities from the Sigma GitHub repository, and in that case, you will need to have a little bit of software on your machine. And then, of course, the third component is the place where you store the data. For most people, that's going to be a SIEM like Splunk or Elastic or Humio or something else. And so in that case, you will need to have something like that installed. I'm guessing most people that are going to find use of these rules probably already have that up and running and have their data in it.
All right, well, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much, Vince, Mark, and Alex, for your great presentation, and to Corelight for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.